All right, this is a segment we're going to call Undivided Attention, where we actually sit down and listen to a record and give an artist our undivided attention for 30 minutes. Because a lot of reviews feel phoned in nowadays, like people just kind of casually listen. So Tanner here and we went through and listened to this self-titled record by Joey Joseph. Um, let's just jump in. He's from Cincinnati. I
Mm-hmm.
guess I'll give a quick backstory. He kind of reached out to Little Star through a mutual friend that I know from Cincinnati. And I knew his other band. I don't know if you looked into this at all, Tanner, but he was in a band called Pomegranates for a better part of the 20 teens, I guess we're calling that decade.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
The
and
name does sound familiar, just from all the different Ohio bands kind of cultivating and whatnot.
they were around. They did a lot of stuff back in the day. I remember seeing them when I was in college. I think they came through Athens. I think Joe and I have talked about this, but they were one of those bands that were just kind of buzzed about and were getting good press and people really liked. And I think like all scenes or all bands, just kind of have a momentum to the project, and he started doing his own stuff after that. And he records all his own stuff. He's got his own studio. Yeah, I'm just curious, man, what your overall thoughts are in general, because I worked this campaign, this album campaign from like April to July, and we got a lot of good press for it. The people who wrote about it, I think, really dug it and understood it, which was really nice.
Before I get into it, off the top of my head, who or what publications wrote about him?
We got him in Glide Magazine, Beats Per Minute, and Rebel Noise. I think were the three. Um, so I think he's like got a long future ahead of him of making like DIY records like this. And my big take on this, I think I've told this to him before, so it's no surprise, but I think if this came out in 2009, it would be like the biggest record in this scene. Like it's so well produced, and it feels timeless, but does kind of harken back to that, like late aughts, early teens kind of thing that was going on with like psych rock, psych pop,
Mm-hmm.
some of the electric stuff in there. Um, yeah, I'm interested to see what you thought, man. I feel like I don't know if we have different tastes in music, but I'm curious to know like where you kind of came from with this and like what you thought when you were listening through. Just about the album overall. We can go over specific tracks, but I'm curious if you had thoughts just in general.
Yeah, no problem. Well, before I do that, let's. I'm gonna show everybody kind of like what the kind of weird
The album art.
pixelated. Yeah, the album art. As you can tell, we're definitely a low budget production here, but I mean the album art itself like speaks for it. Also, like in general, Joey Joseph is a very like just straightforward name. Like hard not to forget that, I guess.
Did you notice how it's spelled?
Joey Joseph. What
Yeah,
do you?
with the E and the S switched around.
I did. Now I did. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that took me a couple pitches, if I'm being honest, before I noticed, and then he kind of corrected me, and it just seems like a little mind game that he
Actually,
plays on people.
you know what? That popped up. Like when I put in, because I was trying to find his album work, and I found it on Google Images. So I typed in Joseph, how like normally it's spelled, but then
Oh
of course
right.
it, or no, I put it in how it's spelled on here. Just like, okay, I'm just looking at it. Okay, go. And then Google is trying to correct me. I'm just like, I think I know how to spell Joseph, but I see what he did there. So I think Joey Joseph is a really cool name just to go by. It's just really easy to remember, and it's really catchy.
Yeah,
And
it
it's
is.
kind of a play on off the word or the name Joey. This is definitely one of those albums where every single song is so different from each other. Like there's a couple. I mean, there's a couple of tracks, especially the first one. I don't know if we're in a garden where it's like just like a garage band attack. I feel like um, along the style of the Stooges, MC5, like that kind of garage rock. And the thing about like all of his songs, like when I listen to it, they're almost cinematic. Like I
Yeah.
hear a song, it may not go with the meaning of the song or what he's trying to like the point he's trying to get across with the song, but like I'll hear a different song, I think of like almost a different movie. When I hear that first song, I don't know if we're in a garden, I think of like a Scott Pilgrim type movie where a bunch of like basically young misfit type people get into a garage or in a basement or someone's house and just playing as loud as they can and screaming into a mic as loud as they can, uh, for better or for worse.
The production stands out right away. I think this is a good example of like where a lot of the record goes.
No,
And
absolutely.
it's very raw. I mean, it reminds me of like obviously like some Ty Segall stuff from, um, late 2000s, and I know what you're saying with Scott Pilgrim, like that. That's just that era. I feel like that was in vogue
Mm-hmm.
back then, and I think that's what's cool about what he's doing. It's it's clearly loves that kind of stuff, and it does seem like 60s meets that, 60s meets late 2000s.
Right.
Like
But then you also have tracks like Frozen Lake where it's like
yeah,
it's literally like if he was composing for a movie and you're listening to this and maybe the movie starts off with like a bunch of like you're walking in a forest or a bunch of forest creatures just doing their forest creature thing. Like I literally just feel like I'm in a national park or like I'm in Bambi or something when I hear a song like that.
yeah, that was the one. I'm glad you brought that up because that was on my mind when you said cinematic. I mean, there's that break in the middle of that song where he just talks. There's the little interlude before that kind of sounds like a jazz guitar lick thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it does sound like a foreign film or something like that. And I feel like that's a pretty good bookend for where this album goes. To start with Garden, and then about halfway through you're at Frozen Lake, and it just seems like albums like this where you take big chances like that, and it feels like they work, like they're deserved. That's
Mm-hmm.
a phrase I like to use. Like if something isn't deserved like that, and there's a lot of experimentation halfway through Frozen Lake, it's a pretty long song. Um, if it's not deserved, if you haven't had other moments that build the momentum before that, it can just kind of feel like wanky, like you're just kind of dicking around. And yeah, it does not come across that way at all, man. It feels like it feels kind of like a revelation when you get to that point in the album. So
I
I
agree.
I know what you're saying overall. It goes a lot of places, and but it's not just like heady the whole time. It's not just like um, the garage stuff really is visceral and raw, and
Those are two good words to put it, visceral and raw.
it's just like good rock music. I mean, it's dressed up with the production and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but
That's another thing. Speaking of the production, you could have fooled me that it was made in like some professional studio, but the guy made it like at his own house or his own studio, like wherever he does it at,
yeah,
like all by himself. Another thing I will add, he put he's already put out like two full albums. Uh, I see one where he put one out on April 11th. The I Came Back as a Volcano album, and then the self-titled one, which we're talking about now, came out just roughly about a month and a half ago. So it's like
yeah,
he's been pushing out two full albums within the span of a couple months of each other, which is something I haven't seen anybody do in a really long time. I've seen people do like singles or maybe like a
yeah,
4 or 5 track
yeah.
EP, but this dude's putting out like the self-titled we're talking right now. It's about clocks in at let's
It's like
see,
32
30,
minutes.
32 minutes 31 seconds, and then the first one I Came Back as a Volcano clocks in at 30 minutes and 16 seconds. So it's like virtually full length albums within a couple months of each other. I just haven't seen that
Yeah,
done in a really long time.
I think that's kind of the point of this segment too. I want to be able to feature artists that are making full records because yeah, everybody does the single thing because it's just kind of more advantageous. But again, it's just he's the kind of guy. It seems like if he wasn't, this is like the what he has to do. I mean, from talking to him too, it just seems like he has to keep making a ton of music all the time. And he's obviously that's the hardest thing I think maybe about the modern era right now is sometimes we've got people making like masterpieces one after another, and yeah, they're getting overlooked just because of I don't know people. It is. I mean, to be fair, it's not conducive of how people listen to music right now for the most part. It is
Mm-hmm.
hard to ask somebody to really dissect several albums, but I don't think he's doing it to like get people to listen to it the way people typically listen to albums. I think he just like has to make this music, because it's inside of him, and then he just gets it out. And yeah, I mean that's very respectable. I hope more people keep doing that, and
No,
I
I
hope there's a
go
way
ahead.
for this stuff to get discovered eventually.
No, I totally agree. Something I also noticed from looking at his Spotify account is the way he went about the releases. Like, I guess in the timeline, he put out "I Came Back as a Volcano" in April, so he didn't release any singles for that. He just put out the whole album. But then throughout the month of June, he put out 2 songs, "Long Hair" and "Frozen Lake," off the new album, which he put out in early July. So I wonder what happened between putting out a full album and then releasing 2 singles for the latest album and then putting out the full album. You know what I mean?
Well, I know the answer to that because we talked about that leading up to the campaign. I mean, he just wanted to try press for this because he hadn't really done press since Pomegranates.
Okay.
And you know, when it's a Bandcamp type project like this or like a home studio type project, it's easier to just kind of put stuff out. But I think he wanted to just try to get some good press to kind of build up his artist resume basically as he was putting this stuff out. And yeah, I don't know. I think that those songs kind of lend well to kind of what we're talking about, just kind of showcase a lot of the different stuff that he did. I think it's smart too to just not like throw everything out there constantly. Like I tell artists all the time, it's fine. Obviously, you don't have to get press for everything you put out, but you know, if you're gonna do press, it's smart to have some kind of consistency to it or have a plan. And I think that's kind of what we did for those releases. We just wanted to like see what it felt like to try press in that style for it. And you know, you like get to talk about the album more often every time you put a single out, you have another reason to talk about the album coming out. And yeah, I think he wanted to make sure it didn't get overlooked or anything like that.
No, for
Um,
sure. I want to give him kudos, one for putting out a lot of content during a pandemic, because some bands are doing that. Some bands aren't flat out doing anything. He's like going above and beyond to put out as much stuff as he can. But of course, like, not that he hasn't been smart about it, but I see it once he kind of teamed up with us. We kind of came up with more of like a plan. I don't know. It also, to me, it attributes to his songwriting, because he writes a full album and then just writes another full length album, like as soon as the one's out.
yeah, I'm assuming he probably had them both written too, you know, like before he sat down to record them, or he'd probably been working on some of the songs longer than
Mm-hmm.
others. But yeah, I think that's really, I think about it, man. Like when you put music out, it's really hard to wrap your head around the idea of putting 2 full lengths out and
Mm-hmm.
not feel like are people gonna take notice. So I think that's pretty. I don't know. It's pretty brave of him to be able to do that and not get too in his head about it. Like whenever I put out music, I always think like try to space it out, or
Mm-hmm.
you know, are people paying attention? But I don't know. Maybe that's not the point anymore. Maybe the point is to like get a really big catalog out there, and then eventually, if people are going to catch on, they'll go back and they'll have tons of stuff to look through. Like think about like a YouTuber or something. If like a
Mm-hmm.
YouTuber takes off and they've been doing it for years and years, people have a ton of videos to go back through when they get discovered for like one video that takes off. Maybe that's a
Mm-hmm.
new model for musicians to be able to
It
just like albums and albums, hours of stuff stockpiled so that when people find what you're doing, it's not like they are waiting for you to put more out because you don't have anything out there already. And I think that's what I see the next decade being like, especially if, you know, we're not gonna be able to do as many shows and all that kind of stuff. It just
mm-hmm.
seems like start stockpiling your music and like what you're good at and be able to like have people discover it in a meaningful way. So
No,
yeah,
for
I hope.
sure. I see it. I see like what he's doing, what other people are doing is almost just building up a resume or portfolio. Like, instead of like just sending someone one song or one album, he could just send him like a copy of or a link of his artist profile on Spotify or whatever, and it just like has everything he's done. So it's like, here's
Yeah,
what.
so like the music, someone said this recently. Actually, it was Bridget G who said this, who's new to Little Star. Um, the music is the business card now, and then like the personality is what you're selling. And I feel like that's a
I
great
totally
example.
I totally agree.
Where like the Spotify link is like a resume, and it's the business card, and that's like what impresses people. but
Mm-hmm.
what you're actually selling is the personality. And like, I don't know, from the album cover to, I want to talk about this too with you. I want to get your take on this, to like his voice. I feel like he's got a ton of personality different than other artists. What did you think of his voice, especially the second track, Little Heart? We kind of hear him, you kind of hear him sing how he sings for the first time on that track. What was your thought as you were?
That's really funny you mention that because like kind of going back and forth between the first track, which again is I don't know if we're in a garden, and then the second track being Little Heart. Going from like the first song to the second song, to me it almost sounded like two completely different artists or different bands.
Yeah,
I know it's Joey, but it sounds like a completely different musician. Whereas you hear other musicians like, you know, they'll sing in this style for this song or such and such, but you know it's them. It could have been two different people. I could have been fooled, you know.
I think he'd want me to point out too. He told me this once. I'm pretty sure that Garden was off of a different record and he re-recorded it for this. So
Okay.
maybe that's why they sound different. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's more of a production thing um, than anything. Again, I think just there's another track on this record. I think it's Oh Man. Don't quote me on that. But there's another track that reminds me of Garden later on
Mm-hmm.
in the record too, production wise. But I do think that most of the record has that kind of, and this is maybe the comparison that came to mind. It kind of reminds me a lot of MGMT's Congratulations, that record. I don't know if you're
Yeah.
familiar with that one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, not like it's a record no one knows or anything like that. It's obviously a really popular record, and I'm sure there's stuff that he's influenced by that is maybe more um, authentic to what he's going for than that record. Like I think that record is kind of a pop record in a way, but I think his voice kind of reminds me of that dude a little bit, and the production, or the instrumentation, I should say, really is pretty similar to that style of like psych stuff that was going on around the time. But there's a certain kind of like beauty to what he's doing, especially I think Little Heart's my favorite track on the record, where it really comes out in his voice. Like, I mean, it's I don't want to say it's weird. His voice, I don't know. It's like a really different kind of voice, and
Mm-hmm.
it's very it's not even high pitched. I can't explain. Just listen to it. Whoever's watching this, just go listen to it. You know what we're talking about.
he's
But
a he's able to sing really comfortably in a higher
yes,
register.
yeah, it's really comfortable sounding. That's a good way of saying it. Yeah, I hadn't really been able to put that into words, but
Yeah, because
yeah,
a lot of times, I mean, I'm not a singer, but you understand when you sing higher, your throat or voice almost sounds like way more compressed, tightening up, where it's like it just sounds way more open and flowing when he does it.
his singing voice sounds like his talking voice. Like there's no push to it in a good way. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's no strain. Yeah, the second half of this song too, Little Heart. Um, I feel like that's my favorite production moment, like the halfway point. There's kind of this like Beach Boys Pet Sounds
Yeah,
smile kind of moment where the track just opens up really wide. And again, yeah, I just feel like this could have been at like Pitchfork Festival in 2009. It could have been, you know, like everyone at Vice would have been talking about it. Like I just, and I don't mean that as a dig either. I get it. Like he's just making music that he really likes and that in the style that he really likes that he's like meant to be making. And I think there's some bands don't understand sometimes like their music will always go in trends, and I don't think it's because that style of music like is better at the time or anything like that.
mm-hmm.
I think there's a certain amount of randomness or like a cultural randomness to what type of music is popular at a certain time.
I'll be
Um,
honest. There's nothing. There's like nothing really concise about anything with the music industry right now in terms of like
yeah, that's what's
popularity and
that's kind of what I was thinking too, and kind of where I was going with that. I mean, it's just like what's the thing right now? I mean, there just isn't. And even like a couple of years ago, I feel there's like emo stuff was getting covered in Pitchfork. Now, I don't even know if music is like the main thing people care about in culture anymore.
I
And it
think
certainly has been for 50 years. So this feels like a significant variation from like what we've been used to. And yeah, I mean that's just what I keep thinking with this. Like, you know, not
it's
that. not that he needed to make this 10 years ago,
Yeah.
but it would just have like a different context to it entirely.
Right. And it's kind of funny you mentioned about just like music's impact on culture, not so much like the taste, but how people like, like their lifestyles. Like I mean, this has been referenced so many times, but you go back to like the early mid '90s, everybody was wearing jeans and flannel and Converse because of Kurt Cobain and Nirvana. Or you had the late '90s, early 2000s new metal things, so everybody's wearing snapbacks and like the wide bottom pants, whatever those are called. And then you have whatever in the 2000s where it's like skinny jeans, hair straightened, highlighted, like everything. Uh, Not so much like I just don't think there's much of anything like that anymore. Like no one's like seeing how an artist or a public figure dresses, or and they're like, oh, I want to do that. And the same with like
Yeah,
music, because like music is just everywhere now, so no one knows like what sound they're going for. Well, they do, but it's not like streamlined.
yeah, there certainly isn't cultural cohesion anymore, and that's what's going to be so hard on musicians going forward. I think,
Actually, I think a better way to put that, my bad, is like a lot of bands really don't want to identify with this, or a lot of bands don't want to identify with a specific genre anymore. They're just like, we do what we do, we like what we like, we just make it what happens, which is good and bad. Good for their creativity and what they want to make, what they ultimately want to produce. But I guess bad and more so like how other people perceive or label. Like trying to describe a band, you're just like, I don't know how to put them into words, but the best way to
yeah,
know what
and
a band sounds like is just to listen. But
I think too many bands have gotten. Oh, this is hard to kind of think about exactly how this works, but it just seems like there's a ton of bands who like make genre music. There's more people making music now than there ever has been. I think a lot of them aren't necessarily lifers the way someone like Joey is, where they're
mm-hmm,
just kind of in it because it's fun. And like I don't know, there's I feel like I'm a lifer, but it's like no shame in doing something just because it's fun. I just don't think a lot of these bands are going to stick around if the going gets tough, and it seems like the going is starting to get tough. So you have people who don't want to be labeled by a certain genre because the past decade or so, there've been a ton of genre bands who have been getting really popular, but maybe don't have as much substance.
mm-hmm,
And that's where someone like Joey or like this record, it's like, well, it doesn't really matter. It fits squarely in a genre, and you could say it fits squarely in a time period, like I've been saying, but I don't think that matters. And I think that kind of goes back to his voice too. He's got such a unique, comfortable voice that's just so, it's so particular when you hear it. His singing voice and just like, I don't know, his vision, his voice as an artist. It's like clearly, I won't say better than most other stuff, but it's clearly more well crafted than most other indie music out there. Like that was my big takeaway on the whole record. Like this is clearly like as far as how it's put together and the production and his intent. Like I think a
mm-hmm.
good record when you put it together and you release it and the vision you have for it. I think if it's a good record, the vision you have for it is the same vision most people have for it when they hear it. And as
Mm-hmm.
far as that goes, I think this is pretty much close to a masterpiece. Like he nailed it, and I think we both immediately, heard what he's going for. And I don't think that 99.9% of musicians could do something like that. So that's why I think this one is so important to feature here and make sure it kind of gets its due diligence. And I hope that, there's a curation problem. Like I hope that good stuff like this, you don't need to sell 10,000 copies anymore. You don't need to sell out venues, but if like even 200 people eventually were obsessed with this record in a meaningful way, I mean, I think that's a realistic goal. And I hope that in just the next decade, artists like Joey find, there are ways that get figured out for that kind of stuff to happen. And for all the other albums he's probably going to make this decade, it's going to be really exciting to see like what else he's able to do in this vein and see how it comes together as like one giant catalog. Because for him, like an album just feels like a single,
Mm-hmm.
in a
I
way
was
that
gonna say, let's be real, he'll probably have a new album next month
yeah, right.
at this rate.
Right. So it's like, it's almost like you add up all his albums and then maybe it paints like a giant 10-hour picture or something by the end of the decade. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's obviously the potential that he has here.
I think no, I agree. I think something that kind of we touch on how the industry seems very single, maybe EP oriented right now, but I think a lot of people forget that an album is actually treated as like one thing versus, okay, this is an album by like 3 of these tracks, or I really only pay attention to these tracks. It's actually like a snapshot of where that artist is, and it's just a collective of like where that artist is in that time. And uh like you said, he probably like wrote all this stuff at once, but then or over a course of time, and then put it out as 2 albums. But also to say what you said in that last point, you can tell he definitely like he didn't just throw these songs together. He's probably would spend all day mixing and mastering, recording, re-recording, listening to his car. Like it's a passion project for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and he probably could have produced this stuff differently, just based on the songs at their most raw form, and I'm sure they would have worked. But that's where the production, his studio is like another instrument entirely. I mean, I can't imagine. I can't imagine working with a different producer if he worked with an outside producer
Mm-hmm.
and then arranged it the same way. Still, I mean, it would sound completely different.
And
Um,
that's another thing with him having his own studio. He's cutting out the middleman of having a studio producer. He could just go in whenever, anytime, any day, and that's probably why he's able to put stuff out so quickly.
right.
Is because he can literally just do everything himself and not have to wait on another person to mix, master, or do whatever. He just does it when he wants to, which is well every couple months.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, that's just the template for artists um, like this going forward. I know a lot of bands have done this too, where um, I've been kind of disappointed. Like they started on a hot streak like this, and then mostly younger bands too. They just kind of burnt out too quickly. I don't know if it has something to do with the current music infrastructure, where it feels like I'm putting all this work into these albums and who's listening to them, that kind of thing. But I think if your goal is like a 10-year goal and I'm going to put all this stuff together and then over, when it's all said and done, people will listen to my whole discography like they listen to an
Mm-hmm.
album. Because think about an album like in the 60s or 50s or whatever, like when they started putting together long play records, that's what obviously what LP stands for. It was like I think the idea of listening to something of rock band for like 40 minutes was probably pretty crazy. I mean, it was like that's what you did with classical music, and rock music was supposed to be like. I bet you like 50s rock music was probably similar to like 2-minute rap songs nowadays. You know,
I'd
how
say so.
it was just like fun, dumb, whatever kind of music that you just put on and then
Each song's only like 2.5 to 3 minutes long.
right, and then involved in this thing where it was sitting down for like almost an hour to listen to rock music. But think about how people listen to any kind of content in general now. I mean, I don't know. I'm really bad about this. I don't know if you are, but like, I'll listen to like a podcast for 4 hours straight, And I think if you even talk to people 10, 20 years ago, the idea of listening to two people have a conversation for 4 hours plus, like, would just be, you couldn't even comprehend that, like why
Mm-hmm.
you would spend your time doing that. That's kind of my hope for DIY musicians like this, that by the end of the decade, people will just, and it doesn't have to be like, it doesn't have to be intense too. Like we listen to this really intently, and I think that's because this music like warrants it. Like he deserves that. But I think
Yeah.
you could put on even to where it's at, his discography's at now, and then assuming where it'll be at in years from now. Like there's no reason you couldn't put on his music for like 6 hours at a time and just like listen to, have the best parts just kind of pop out and catch your attention. Like
Mm-hmm.
I hope people figure out a way to like market this music out there to be listened to like that, because that's the thing that gets talked about a lot with podcasts, is that you kind of have it on the background and you kind of pick out the parts that stand out the most to you. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a kind of collective experience we're having, where it's like we all know that we do that, but we all, if there's certain stuff like that, like people have seen like the Joe Rogan stuff with like Elon Musk or whatever, so that's kind of like a connected cultural experience that we're still having. A lot of people have watched that, but it's like the moments that stuck out when people watched that podcast were probably different moments for every person, except for that time that he smoked weed. Obviously, that one stands out.
That was
But
for
like,
everybody, yeah, for sure.
right. But every other moment, there are probably little things that I remember these two things from the podcast, and then other people that I remember that. And I kind of want that to be like where albums could head for artists like this, because it used to be that like album like Nevermind, everybody knows like every song on that record, like every moment on that record. And I just think we listen to music and take in content differently nowadays, where that shouldn't necessarily be the goal. Like that might be too fatiguing for people because there's already so much of like there's too many choices. There's already this decision fatigue that exists out there. I think if you put on something consistent that spans hours and hours, would be really cool to see how, if that changes people's listening habits, and if that would be like advantageous for artists like Joey, because you just want to, I think for someone like him to get his name out there in a new way that hasn't been done before, I think you just have to prove that he's like clearly like he's like a master craftsman at this stuff, and you just got to prove that conceptually. You don't have to prove with every single song you put out. You just have to prove as a whole.
I think with him, it's like to really understand where he's coming from, you almost have to listen to the whole thing to really get the big picture.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like it's just kind of my bigger point. Like I think eventually you'll have to listen to all his records to have gotten the bigger picture, not just have picked one, because that's always like I don't know. Even with like the Rover stuff, if you listen to our stuff on Spotify, you can't just pick one song. It doesn't sum up what we're doing as a whole. And I think there's more and more artists like that, and I think I think his albums are gonna be like, kind of a similar thing, where it's not just like a one kind of moment he keeps rehashing to get people excited, because there are a ton of different production moments on this thing. So
and to kind of go back to what you said a little bit ago, we kind of live in a society, not just in music, but really just generally speaking, of instant gratification. So that's probably why like a lot of bands get burned out, because they do put in the work on whatever they did, and if they don't get the success immediately, like the idea of like you go to a job interview now and someone's like, what's your 5-year plan? A lot of people kind of struggle with that question more, because they're like, they want to get that raise as soon as possible. They want that bonus as soon as possible. Same thing with music. You want to put out an album, and like you hope an album drops at midnight, and then you wake up the next morning and your phone is blown up with like how good your people think your album is, or like it's gotten viral like on Facebook or Twitter or something. But it works with some, but not everybody. So that's where a lot of people get discouraged. It's like, how come it's happening for this band but not us? But there's millions of bands trying to beat the algorithm and getting our attention. So we can't get it all at once, even though it's all out there.
There used to not be millions of bands. That's what I hope people understand too. Like when we talk about this stuff, the number of bands that exist now versus even 20 years ago, I mean, it's got to be like 1,000 times more. Like just to get music that exists on Spotify. So it's like, you're not gonna have the same kind of odds in pop culture to kind of be picked up, and that's why I feel like, I don't know, I feel like Little Star, in a way, a little bit, it exists in a realm that's like a little bit outside of pop culture. We're kind of trying to create our own little universe and curate the bands that we like the most. Just because, I've listened to a ton of bands over time here. But yeah,
and we'll continue to do so.
We'll continue to do so. I'm doing it for you, for all you peeps out there.
I would say, I actually think that when it comes to like the number of bands out there, I feel like they definitely increased within the past 5 or 10 years, because I think when people figure out how powerful, I mean, iTunes has been around for a while, but once like it really became Apple Music and Spotify became Spotify, people are like, oh, if I just upload it, everybody will hear it. So I think that's why what gave everybody the initiative to do it, and that's why so many bands exist now more than ever as well.
Dude, even 10 years ago, the idea of like making a record all yourself in your bedroom was still a novel idea, and now it's just kind of the standard to make music like that. And that's also what's interesting about this Joey Joesph stuff, is because like, I don't know. He's clearly sounds a lot better than people that by and large people that make stuff on their own. And I don't know. It's just crazy to think about how far that production's come. Like bedroom production really has
Mm-hmm.
become like a mainstream sound.
No, dude, the time he's definitely put into his shows, and I going back to 2010. I think about like how we were consuming music in 2010. I remember like buying iTunes gift cards or receiving iTunes gift cards as like gifts, and still buying CDs. And when Hot Topic
Yeah.
had a CD section, or when CDs were way more in demand uh, than they are now. Like I think I even remember going to local shows back then, and like how hard a band would push like their new CD, whether it's like a full album or EP. It's like, and then people kind of slowly discover Bandcamp and SoundCloud. Like, oh, you can just put it online, share the link. But then I think Apple Music and Spotify definitely simplified sharing music, and now it's all on one device versus having here's like a flip phone, then here's like an iPod or some kind of MP3 device, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I remember I was in a band 10 years ago that like sold 400 copies of our CD. That's just like insane to even think about. It sounds like so much now. Yeah, it's a different world entirely, and I hope that Joey keeps doing his thing.
Absolutely.
For how different a world is. So let's wrap it up, man. Like, did you have any other thoughts in general? Have you you think you kind of said everything there is to
Um,
say?
I'm good. I just think that I'll just go over what I said. Like every song on this album is completely different from each other. So you get a little bit of everything where he's coming from, whether it's from like a band point of like a garage band point of view to something super cinematic and everything in between. And then yeah, like we said about albums, it's like to really get the idea of where he's coming from, you kind of have to listen to the whole album. It's only half an hour. Like half an hour really isn't that bad. Which that's
You
another
can
thing.
do it, guys. Don't be a jerk. You can take a half hour out of your day. If we took a half hour out of our day and
Hmm.
it was worth our time, it's probably worth yours.
I actually think like in 30 minutes is almost like the in between of a EP and then like a more so full length album, which I think is more pushing an hour. So it's like I think it's the perfect medium.
Yeah, it does kind of feel like the perfect length. We're just because there's some longer moments on the record that kind of need to play out. Kind of we're talking about like being more cinematic. There's definitely some longer moments on the record, but it doesn't feel like it. This is the last thing I'll say about it. I think I maybe kind of touched at this earlier, but it never feels like he's just like doing stuff to kind of like dick around, which is refreshing with this kind of music because I've listened to a lot of like psych rock stuff where it just feels like they're just kind of messing around to like see if they stumble into something. Everything is obviously very hyper targeted, and
No, that's a
there's
good
even
point.
transition track, the third track, kind of sounds like something off the White Album, but
Yeah.
I don't know, like it serves its purpose in the album. Like that's yeah, I think that's a very underrated skill. It's hard to do to be able to kind of filter yourself to not do anything that's too self you know what's the word, well just to not have it be too focused on like what you want to do for fun and making sure
Hmm.
that the record like it stays a solid record that you know has a really tight feel across the board on it. So
Right. And
yeah.
let's check out this album artwork one more time.
Oh yeah, I mean that's what caught my attention. It's a really good album artwork.
No, I agree. But yeah, literally to kind of close up what I'm saying too, it's like it's half an hour of purposeful music. Like every single song has a purpose, and it'd be a crime not to listen to it flat out. Like I think I listened to this all the way through last night, and then this afternoon before our call, just to make sure I had everything covered, and just it's really incredible stuff. So definitely check out Joey Joesph, and then that is Joseph spelled Joesph. But of course, probably above in the thing we'll have like a link to his info. So
Yeah, but check it out, everybody. We'll start PR signing off. Until next time.
later, y'all.